Hi, I'm Bob Herbert. Welcome to OpEd.tv. Donald Trump has won the U.S. presidency again, and it wasn't close. Trump won the male vote overwhelmingly. He won white women voters. He made dramatic inroads in the Latino vote, the black vote, and the vote of young Americans. Voters in cities, suburbs, small towns, and rural areas moved further to the right, rejecting whatever the Democrats had to offer. Republicans won control of both the Senate and the House. It didn't matter that Trump ran a racist, sexist, vile, and often unhinged campaign. It didn't matter that he promised mass deportations, accused Haitian immigrants of eating the pet dogs of American families, that he has vowed to pardon the rioters who stormed the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021. None of that mattered. Trump won, and he will take office in January with virtually no constraints, with few of the so-called guardrails designed to protect American democracy. As David Remnick wrote in The New Yorker, this is a deeply dangerous moment in American life. How did this happen, and what does it mean? What's ahead for the Democrats? And what can the millions of demoralized and frightened Americans who did not vote for Trump, what can they do now? I'll ask these questions and more of an old friend and colleague of mine. He's Philip Lentz, a veteran political reporter, speechwriter, and campaign operative who worked with me way back in the 1970s at the Star-Ledger in New Jersey, and later worked for the Chicago Tribune and the old Philadelphia Bulletin. Phil was also press secretary for the former presidential candidate Paul Tsongas, and he has served as the director of speechwriting for former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. It's a pleasure and an honor to have you here, Phil.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for coming in. It's great. Before we get into the politics of all of this, what are your biggest concerns about the prospects of this next Trump administration?
That the structure of our democracy could crumble. I mean, that sounds like it's apocalyptic, but if you look at...
It sounds apocalyptic, and it also sounds like it's a possibility.
But if you look at what's happened in other, quote, illiberal, I don't know who invented that phrase, but autocracies, whether it's Hitler or Hungary, it goes bit by bit.
Yep.
So you'll have some cabinet officials that will sort of ignore the typical guardrails and the normal rules. And he has enough judges there in the Supreme Court that will be allowed to stand. And so it'll be bit by bit, and there'll be controversy. Oh, I can't believe he did this. I can't believe he did this every step of the way.
Yep. And I can imagine a situation where he declares some sort of an emergency or whatever, and then he needs emergency powers and blah, 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 blah.
Well, the danger in that is if he declares there's laws on the books, there's the Insurrection Act, the Alien Sedition Act, 200 years ago, that he'll ask the military. And that's where the rubber meets the road. That's why he wants to put a defense secretary in there. And will the generals, who now he is threatening to court-martial for treason after Afghanistan, will they be so cowed that they'll do whatever he asks them to do?
The conventional wisdom after the results came in was that the Democrats paid too little attention to the concerns, especially the economic concerns of the so-called working class. But there were many other factors in this election. There are always like a lot of factors. It wasn't a landslide. It was a resounding victory for Trump. What was really going on? I mean, the economy obviously was a factor. I don't think it was legitimately a factor, but it was a factor. What else was going on?
Well, if you look at Harris's campaign, she did try to address those issues. I mean, she was very specific about help for housing, help for child care. She was talking about those issues. But I think that the fact that for working people, the economy had been so bad and the inflation was so bad, plus the leader who brought about that, Joe Biden, just looked feeble and inarticulate, and when I was unable to explain what we were coming out of things. I mean, this has happened before. If you remember, in 1992, Clinton ran on the economy because the economy was bad under Bush, but by the election, the economy was coming back, but it was too late for George Bush. And the same thing happened this time. I mean, I think that if someone more articulate or more presentable, like a Gavin Newsom, had been president during this time, maybe it wouldn't have been as bad, but just Biden was a terrible spokesperson, and so people had the feeling that no one was really in charge and things were bad. And so the people whose biggest concern was the economy, that's why they felt they sort of zoned out whatever Harris was saying.
So I was going to ask you about Biden a little later, but I might as well.
Yeah.
You brought it up. So we'll talk about it now. The inflation was a problem, but there were reasons for it which we don't need to go into now. You know, coming out of the pandemic, which I think that the economy coming out of the pandemic was really held. Really, they did a good job on that. And inflation was, in fact, coming down. But beyond the economy, I mean, Biden did some good things. He had some bipartisan, big legislative victories. He had infrastructure initiatives that were really helpful and created jobs and that sort of thing. But it was pretty obvious that he stayed at the fair too long. If we're trying to be fair, how much blame does Biden deserve for this debacle?
Oh, I think he deserves a fair amount. I mean, there's, in a sense, the midterm elections were deceived the Democrats to think they were doing well, that Biden was doing well, that their message was getting out, and part of it was Roe v. Wade, part of it was bad candidates on the Republican side. But if you look at what's happened in the past, in 1994 with Clinton, in 2010 with Obama, they both got shellacked in the midterms.
Yeah.
And that forced them to sort of reorient themselves and say, what are we doing wrong here? We need to change our message to what we're doing. That did not happen with Biden because they thought they were doing fine. And that was the problem, that there was no mid-course correction.
That we consistently underestimate the extent of the racism, the misogyny, the homophobia, the anti-Semitism, and other forms of bigotry that's in the election. And it's sort of always there, but I think that we tend to downplay the worst aspects of it. I think it was a big deal. What are your thoughts about that sort of thing?
I think that the voters that vote based on the racial hatred or fighting the libs, I think that's the base, that's the MAGA base. But that's not what elected Trump, because Barack Obama, who was black, won. And so I think there's a slice of the electorate who is not racist, is more concerned with how you're going to get food on the table. And these are people who voted for Obama, maybe voted for Trump in 2016, voted for Biden in 2020, and they just feel we're unhappy. So I think that Trump has a very strong base in that very far right-wing, racist, fascist, authoritarian, but that's not enough to get him elected.
I won't belabor this, but Trump did open the doors to bigots of kind of all stripes to be out there.
He's given legitimacy.
I can't believe that this stuff has no effect. I mean, especially since he pounded the table on immigration and also on bad-mouthing other countries, other non-white countries, and that sort of thing. You don't think it was particularly significant in terms of the results, especially with a black woman candidate on the other side?
I think by itself, different candidate, maybe a different economic situation. Remember, he lost the popular vote twice before that with the same message.
This time he won the popular vote.
This time he did, and I think that the difference was the economy. There's no doubt that his misogynistic, racist rhetoric legitimizes these, Proud Boys and racist elements in our society and gives them more voice and more credibility. But I don't think by itself that's what won the election. There's another issue, and that's the immigration issue, and I think that's part of a larger issue of security. He made people in South Dakota and Wisconsin afraid of immigration, and they're nowhere near the southern border.
Well, don't you think that's a form of bigotry? I mean,
Yes.
It's basically non-white immigration that they were afraid of.
Yes.
I mean, there was a reason why he went after Haitians, for
Yes.
example. Haitians are not, even when you start talking about the southern border, it's not Haitians pouring over the southern.
It's the fight against the other, which is not only racial, but also it was sexual. That his most popular ad was the transgender ad that ended with Harris is for they, them, Trump is for you.
Yeah.
And the whole fear that unless they elect Trump, that boys who become girls will be participating in girls' sports really scares middle class families.
But this is part of the fascist playbook going back to your initial
Yeah.
response to the first question, that step by step you have to identify the other. The other is responsible for all the ills of the society. So I mean, it's part of that whole.
It is, and having to quantify how much was the economy, how much was the fear of other, how much was immigration. It's difficult to parse through that.
Right. We can't, and I agree.
Yeah.
We can't quantify it to any great degree, but I do think that I believe it's a very significant factor. We kept hearing that women were going to determine the outcome of this election. A lot of people thought that meant that Kamala was going to win. That women were not just motivated, but angry as a result of the demolition of Roe v. Wade, and then also the misogynistic rhetoric and that sort of thing. This never happened, and,
Yes.
and Trump actually won the women's vote. So what do you think was actually going on, as opposed to what people wanted to happen with women voters?
The gender gap was almost exactly the same for Biden and Trump as Harris and Trump. I mean, it didn't, the women who were really upset about it were going to vote for Harris anyway. Just look at the abortion referendums. How many in states like Montana and Arizona where people, I presume women, voted for Trump and then turned around and voted for a pro-abortion amendment. So they were able to sort of split that in their minds, that they're Trump and reproductive rights. I just don't think it was not a major factor. If you look at the demographics of the polling, the difference in Hispanic voting, difference in age, how young people voted for Trump, older people tended to vote more for Harris, but it didn't make up for it. I mean, I saw one of the exit polls about who did first-time voters vote for, and Trump won that vote. And that was a vote that, if you would ask 10 years ago, Democrats say, "Oh, we're coming on."
That's a lot. Yeah, right. Exactly. So if you take the Latino vote, Latinos have so much to lose if Trump were to follow through on his promises with regard to immigration. Now I know Latino voters are citizens, so they don't have to worry about being deported, but they have relatives and friends and colleagues and associates and people that they care about and people that they love. And yet Trump makes these significant inroads in the Latino vote. So what do you think's going on there?
It's the gangplank philosophy that once I'm in, I don't want someone else to come in. I mean, it's sort of like, I think that, the sympathy for the relatives was less important than, well, if it was more immigration, they might threaten my job. There's also another factor. Most Hispanics are Catholic.
Yeah.
So the whole abortion issue did not cut with them. And in fact, they might have even been supportive of what Trump did. So I think that's part of it, but that would have been true 4 years ago as well. But I think it's the economic stuff was really overrode his anti-immigration rhetoric.
Also a great deal of misogyny there. And I think that there were a lot of Latino voters who just could not imagine the idea of a woman being in charge of the country, being in charge of the military.
I don't think that's just with Hispanics. I think that's with the general public,
I
too.
agree.
I think I mean, Trump was sort of lucky he got to run against two women, but I think there's a significant segment of the electorate that just cannot envision a woman as president, and I think that that's conservative people. It's not just men. If you ask them, they would give you another reason. It's the economy, it's immigration, but I think that that's a significant factor.
Do you think that there was anything Kamala Harris could have done to actually turn it around, or was the Trump tide just too strong?
Probably, but I think that
the tide was
probably, but one of the things she should have done is focus more on the economy. They changed in the middle of the campaign to talk about democracy. And for people who are very angry and afraid of Trump, that's a motivating factor. But those people are going to vote for her anyway. She should have never, they misread 2022 midterms that democracy was a significant factor. I mean, I was surprised that she didn't talk more about a $15 minimum wage. Maybe
Right.
the last week of the campaign, that should have been in the convention speech she'd been talking about at every audience. I mean, that sort of would connect to people. Would have made a
goes
difference.
directly to the economic
Yes,
concerns
yes.
and of working people specifically.
Yeah.
So why do you think they didn't emphasize that?
They were talking. They sort of made their platform and said, "We're going to run on our platform, and we're not going to get a $15 minimum wage past Congress anyway." But any of the stuff she's talking about, you weren't going to get past Congress.
Right.
It wasn't a matter of getting things done. It was a matter of giving a vision of where you wanted to take the country.
Right.
I think that was a major mistake.
One of the biggest complaints about the Democratic Party is that it has become too elitist, too many West Coast types funded by big money and that sort of thing, and that the Democrats have lost their traditional roots with the working class. You, in discussions that I've had with you before now, say that there's some truth to that.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
I think there is. I mean, if you look at the exit polling, one areas of one segment of the public where she did better was college-educated people. Democrats used to be the party of the working class, of the unions, and starting with Ronald Reagan, that has dissipated. And there's a sense that they're, it's the coastal elites, and they don't care about flyover country. And Trump was able to exploit that sense of being ignored.
Now, a lot of people would say, well, it's a good thing if you have better educated supporters or a better educated electorate. They would also say Democratic policies are better for working people, whatever Trump and the Republicans may say, than the alternative. And what would your response to that be?
NAFTA.
I took a lot of heat for opposing NAFTA in the early days, my early days as a columnist at the Times, but go ahead.
I think that was the beginning of when Democrats started trying to lose, well, really with Reagan they started to lose it, but
Yeah.
NAFTA was, and if you look at the macro picture, NAFTA is a good deal. I mean, it lowers trade volume, will increase sales, increase economic activity, but the trouble was that macro, yes, it will create more jobs, but on a micro level, if you're a worker for a factory in Wisconsin, your job's going to Mexico or China, and there was thousands and millions of workers who lost their jobs because of that, and that anger is still there.
And that was my problem with NAFTA. I am not opposed to free trade. I favor free trade, but I felt that NAFTA should have had protections in it for American workers, and also environmental protections,
Yes.
which people have completely forgotten. Completely
But I think that was the beginning
about.
of when people in Middle America got to feel, well, maybe the Democratic Party isn't for me anymore.
Looking ahead to 2028, which is horrifying. Trump
Will we get there?
Trump hasn't even taken office. But if you're looking ahead, and the Democrats have just gone through a real debacle, what are some of the first steps the Democrats need to be doing, and obviously they need to be doing it right now, to begin to get their act together going forward?
First, they have to listen to people. There was a congresswoman from Washington State, Perez, I believe it is. She owns a car dealer business with her husband, and she beat a right-wing MAGA in a very purple district. And she said, Kamala Harris never talked to me. And she won. She's won twice now. And I think Democrats need to listen to people like that who've won in those purple districts to find out, well, what are they saying that we should be saying nationally? But part of it really depends on what's going to happen over the next 2 years. If the economy goes in the tank because of tariffs and immigration, grocery prices are going to go up. That will give an easy argument for Democrats. The question is, the people who switched and became Trump supporters, are they transactional and will go back if the economy is bad, or they just believe in Trump and will believe whatever he says, even if it's not true? And I think that depends on what happens over the next 2 years.
Do you have any faith in the Republican Party? I mean, they have control, or they will have control of the Senate and the House. Do you have any faith that they will, even if Trump goes crazy, which is easy to imagine, that they will try to restrain him?
No.
You're shaking your head.
No. I mean, he's beaten down and taken full control of the Republican Party, and everyone who opposed him is no longer there. And that'll be interesting what's going to happen in the Senate. Are they going to allow him to allow these recessed appointments? I can see senators voting no on Gates, but can they vote on all the Kennedy and Gabbard and Hotspit? I just don't see them all doing that. They'll find one hill to stand on. maybe Gates.
Or even with the Matt Gaetz, I mean, if they decide to block that appointment, for example, Trump can come back, right back with another person who is less controversial than Gaetz, but who would be just as, in my opinion, just as bad as Gaetz in terms of going forward with Justice Department policies.
Yeah, some of the names that were mentioned are well, anyone he puts there is going to do what Trump wants him to do. And if that means indicting Biden or going after retribution, indicting Tish James, they will do it. That's the danger, and there's actually now there's a group of politicians and group of voters who are politically homeless. You know, Mitt Romney, Mike Pence, people who were traditional Republicans who believe in democracy. They can't go to the Democratic Party, but they can't stay in the Republican Party. And I don't know where those people go.
If you're talking about the survival of democracy, how can a Mitt Romney or a Mike Pence or something like that justify, I won't say actually going to the Democratic Party, but actually supporting Democrats in a united effort to protect democracy? I mean, you said it sounds apocalyptic. It does sound apocalyptic. It is apocalyptic.
Some did. I mean, there's a whole, but not just Liz Cheney. And
I mean becoming more active, you know.
Because they're afraid. I mean, let's see what he does.
Afraid of
Trump and what will they do with Liz Cheney? I mean, you know, what will they do with Jack Smith? Will they try to indict him? You know, how vindictive will they become? Look what happened with Bezos and the Washington Post.
Right.
Everyone is afraid. They don't want to get in his
LA
bad graces.
Times too, right?
Right.
Would not.
Yeah, they're run by a company. The guy who
would not endorse Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
Wow. And in the Washington Post, they actually had the endorsement ready. They were going to endorse.
Right.
And Bezos said, no way.
Yeah.
Wow. So between the two of us, we have spent more years than I care to count, actually, laboring in the fields of journalism. The fundamental justification for journalism in a democracy is that you need a well-informed electorate. You know, part of our job is to try and see as best we can that that is the case. A huge portion of the American electorate is anything but well-informed. I mean, in my view, I think a lot of voters are dangerously ignorant. I mean, they can't tell you, they're unable to tell you what the three branches of government are. Doesn't that make much of the electorate really vulnerable to the fascist playbook, vulnerable to people exploiting the identification of the other, racism, lies, and disinformation, all of which we're seeing, you know, blossoming right now? Are you concerned about that?
That's a concern, but more of a concern is that people have their own silos for getting information. And so many people, all they do is, you know, watch Fox News and have Facebook feeds about, you know, the right wing. And so they never even hear the other side. And so they believe what all the lies that are being spread out there by Trump and his people about how the immigration is causing all our problems. And so there's, how do Democrats even break through to those people to say, you know, this is not true. This is, you know, we've been told is a lie. And that's the danger, that people are living in their own news silos and they believe whatever they're told.
But at some point in a democracy, there's a responsibility that falls on the voters themselves. In my view, and in the view of a lot of people, we're in a crisis right now. What can ordinary people do? And not even using the term voters, what can ordinary Americans do now collectively to fight back against the potential of disaster that we face at the moment?
There's not a lot of things that individuals can do. I mean, you can try to make sure you're well informed and don't just get persuaded by one side or the other, so you know what's going on. But it's a matter of supporting institutions that are objective, if there's such a thing. And the basic bottom line is a voting booth, eventually. And that has to be the place where voters say, no, this is going too far.
Do you have any faith in the idea of direct action, collective action, organizations that are not particularly political?
That happened 8 years ago when Trump was elected. There was all those marches. There was the Women's March, if you remember. What did it get us?
But it also happened in the civil rights movement. It happened in the women's movement. It happened even before in the labor movement. It takes a long time, but it did happen.
And it had a sympathetic, in the civil rights movement, you had a sympathetic court system.
That's true.
You had a whole section of the country, the northern part of the country, that knew what the South was doing was not only bad, but was bad for too long. Epitomized with Bull Connor and the fire hoses on demonstrators that just horrified people. So will Trump do something like with the mass deportation that will horrify people and they say that's too much? Or will they say, well, they deserve it anyway? I don't know. But that's the danger for Trump, that they'll go too far too fast and alienate people saying this isn't what we voted for.
Well, we're running out of time, but I have to ask the question because I personally want to know. Are you optimistic or pessimistic now? What are your thoughts in terms of having a belief that the system will hold or thinking that something truly terrible might happen?
There will be terrible things that are going to happen. And there's going to be outrage, and he's going to do them anyway because there's no guardrails on him, either with the courts or in Congress. And the question is, will they go overboard in such a way that even normal Republicans who support him will say, well, that's a little bit too much. And can we survive to the next midterms when hopefully the Democrats can take back the House because of what has happened? That will be a stop to doing anything worse.
I wish we had more time. Phil, that is fantastic. We've been talking with my friend and former colleague, Phil Lentz. I'm Bob Herbert. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. CUNY TV now has an app. Downloading the CUNY TV app lets you join us anytime from anywhere.